incredibly excited today to be joined by Michelle Wilde Anderson to talk about some of the fantastic work that she has been doing around citywide poverty and beyond in America. She has written an absolutely tremendous book, The Fight to Save the Town, which is an award winning book. She is a professor at Stanford Law School and also just a brilliant mind trying to better understand what is going on across a range of communities in the U.S. when it comes to inequality, opportunity, wrestling with some of the challenges of local government, and thinking about how to bring stakeholders on board. So, Michelle, I'm very excited to be able to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm really delighted to be here. Hi, everybody.
So, obviously, as always, feel free to jump in with, any questions that you all have. We'll do our best to try and respond to them as they, come in. But Michelle, I wanted to start off with a, question for you because, you spent so much, time talking with local officials, spending time in these, communities, working with, organizers and people who wrestle with a lot of these challenges. But before we go too deep into those communities, I want us to kind of like zoom out and think about this, national moment and what you have learned in those communities and maybe what it says about sort of what's going on across the country and, in our economy and in poverty and some of these social challenges that we're experiencing.
Thank you. I'd love that. And Jeremy, just a quick, true thanks to you for building this community here around inequality. It's so important. And for everybody who's making time to have this conversation, I really have so much respect for that. It's hard. This year has been such cognitive overload for a lot of us. So to continue learning and to continue showing up for conversations about poverty is just really, really impressive. And I think for me and for you, Jeremy, and for a lot of people in the audience, we do that. We keep showing up because there's actually incredible rewards here in terms of, I don't know, showing up alongside places of tremendous resilience. And that's what this book was about. Um, so super big picture, I should say, I'm a law professor and 2025, hard time to be a law professor. Wow. A lot of
Yeah.
volcanic legal change in the federal government. And I'm a local government person, and all of that legal change kind of rains down on local governments. So just staying on top of what's been going on for states and local governments across this year has been overwhelming. And I guess actually as the year wore on, I started to wonder, like, why do I do place-based work? Why do I do local government work? And sitting here now as 2025 kind of comes to a close, I remember why I do it, because these places that I work on have been through such unbelievable hardship, and they're managing to sort of build the kind of civil society to get out of that. And that's what we're doing as a nation, and that's what we need to do as a nation. And so they feel to me like these microcosms and these teachers of the larger social and political work that's before us. So I can talk about more about where the places I work on have been, but I think super big picture, that's why as we go into 2026, I continue to feel like learning from cities is one of the things we have to do.
Yeah, and I know you and I in the past have talked a bit about this concept of like, communities as these, teachers, right? What example they can, set for us and how those areas can really, grow to test out with what works, with what doesn't work, like whether it's on, a local policy level with some community organization, with a, private sector company that's offering, various services, and thinking about how that can continue to scale outwards because often some of the best ideas emerge in communities, and so it's a similar reason why we also take that very community based approach to a lot of this work. But yes, let's talk about some of those communities. So one, so your book, profiles these, four areas across the US that have these very different narratives, right? Some are, all white, all black, rural cities. They kind of, cover the broad spectrum of, you know, population loss or manufacturing loss. Stockton, California is probably like perhaps I think in our world, maybe one of the most famous ones, right, had this, fantastic, like, many people may have heard about it from like the cash program that Mayor Tubbs ran in that area. Can you talk about your time in Stockton, what you learned, some of the stories from people that you engaged with there, and also thinking about what that can, kind of tell us about like a broader picture that you learned?
Yeah, Stockton is such an extraordinary place. A lot of Americans haven't heard of Stockton because California has so many big cities, and Stockton is 300,000. That doesn't feel that big for our state. But Stockton is one of some years, the most racially and ethnically diverse place in America, which makes it one of the most diverse places on earth. And if you just like stop and look at that fact for a minute, it's kind of amazing. Like we should be learning from Stockton, learning from
Yeah.
some of the things that make that project of kind of global integration hard, and some of the things that make it spectacularly um, productive and important. And so Stockton should be kind of a prized place that
Mm,
Americans sort of learn from and look at. It's not the only city like that. I'm proud that California has a few places like that. Richmond, California is another one. But it's just really, really special. So I want to start there. Um, and what goes on in Stockton is kind of the same timeline, I would say, that goes on in all the places that I've worked on really since the Great Recession, which is that there's this kind of this downward spiral that Stockton gets stuck in, even really through the recession. And in the book, I think of it in Sonia Sotomayor's words of love and misery. She's describing her alcoholic father, but she's she's describing in the context of her father how love and misery travel alongside each other. They don't cancel each other out. And Stockton, when I first got there, really felt like that principle, these two things that are both there, but they don't cancel each other out, became really important to me in learning from the city because it is so pathologized for violence and for drug trafficking, and for incredible poverty related to the fact that it's this farm worker, food production and distribution hub for America. And so it's got tremendous poverty, um, and an eviction crisis. It's just got a lot of problems. And yet Stockton is a place of families, it's a place of couples, it's a place of festivals, it's a place of jokes in high school classrooms, all the things that make a town a town. And so I do not believe in American carnage in Stockton or anywhere else. Um, so that's something, to just start with. But Stockton goes on this road that all my places have gone on, which is that it has these really serious problems around violence and concentrated poverty, and then it crashes deeper. I even made, because you're so high tech on your visualization, Jeremy, I made a super lo-fi
Oh,
visual
wow.
aid. Ready? Is that okay? So we start with the kind of love and misery, and then there's
Yeah.
some kind of crash, the Great Recession,
Hmm.
foreclosure crisis, spike in homicides. In Stockton's case, a massive fiscal crisis that sends the city spiraling into municipal bankruptcy. And, at this point in the story, we all can picture that a place that's under that much pressure can start to just slide farther down, right? And, first that's kind of what happens. Like people
Yeah.
want to GTFO, which I hope your audience understands, or they
Yes,
want
they
to
do.
hide in their bunker, or as one of your other guests put it recently, they get in their like warlord groups to protect themselves. There's a lot, we can do that. And then when a city goes down that road, it breaks some of its people, it breaks some of its
Yeah.
families, it breaks some of its children. And the amazing thing about Stockton, and what really brought me there, and I think Mayor Tubbs deserves so much credit for kind of finding these seeds of progress, drawing them together, putting them in a room, creating tons of energy and pride around them. Um, is that all these people sort of refuse that vicious spiral downward, and they really start to just do stuff. I mean, it's, like, so basic. In the moment that all this is happening, anything that any one person is doing is really dinky, right? I'm just somebody organizing a soccer league on this vacant park that's been taken over by dealers, somebody organizing a basketball league in a gym that's been closed, somebody organizing a safe Halloween, somebody organizing a literacy program for preschool, whatever. All kinds of stuff starts going on all over the city, and then this second step happens in which people start just hanging out in a room every Friday morning, 8 a.m., with donuts and OJ, shifting nonprofits who hosts it, and all the youth programs sit in the same room. They stop doing scarcity politics and competition. They start actually doing stuff together, trying to make the pie of resources bigger. And slowly but surely, good things happen. And it's really hard to overstate how powerful it is in all of my places. When good things start to happen, it recovers this kind of self confidence or belief that this place is that good things are possible. And I think,
Yeah.
when places are declining over a long period of time, people really lose that faith in each other. There was a pastor in Stockton named Curtis Smith who just was beautiful to talk to, and one of the things that he described, he was running these candlelight vigils at night to sort of take back Stockton's
Yeah.
sidewalk so people could walk at night, and he said, that in this season of austerity, we can't just face the facts, we have to faith the facts. And people start to faith the facts and they start to see progress. And then you see this kind of upswing in which the community sort of starts building momentum in a better direction. See, I did the last arrow. Woo!
Wait, so sorry. This side is punish,
This
tough.
is
Oh,
Well, yeah, we haven't
faith the
talked about this.
facts.
I can
Okay.
come back
Yes.
to this. But yeah, we can keep going down, sort of plunging into further problems, sort of spiraling downward, or places can sort of start turning into, more productive cycles. And all of my places, what really brings them together for me is that they figured out how to create momentum out of their darkest moments. And that part of the arrow, I'll just mention it quickly because that to me is what outsiders do. When Stockton entered bankruptcy or when Detroit entered bankruptcy, all the reporters swarm in and they blame everybody and they talk about in Stockton, people really perceived it as like they're calling us, Australians coming in and calling us country bumpkins and we can't manage our way out of a hole. And we just, all of the blame starts
Yeah.
surfacing, and then all of the despair, and then some like lawyers and people come in with these solutions. I think of them as spreadsheet solutions, like, oh, you just done some technical things wrong, we can fix those
Right.
things, we can
Right.
write down your debt. And those things may help with this or that debt management problem. They may be really important, actually, but they're very expensive to solve in that way. And meanwhile, all of the really deep poverty that was truly causing intergenerational disinvestment and despair is just untouched. So,
Um,
those spreadsheet solutions are not good enough. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, like this part of building momentum and kind of that like tipping point, right? Of you have, many different small things that are, maybe individually, not enough to move the needle. But then you sort of like have this moment where people start coming together, where the place starts, turning around. Because I think about so many places across the US, right, that have been, stuck in these downward cycles of poverty, not because people haven't been trying, they are like trying to, create that momentum. They're doing those small things. Like, what did you see in kind of these places that led them to, kind of create that, force, to move past and actually start, going on that black line upwards?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is true vision and leadership. And some of it is just scrappy people sort of from the bottom doing some things, sort of encircling a few people bigger than their immediate family. So, as I said, Tubbs, his movement in Stockton was run by a social worker. And for the kind of urban types in the crowd and for you, that, typically a lot of mayoral politics are run by growth coalitions around real estate. They are run by, development ideas. And Stockton for a long time was run that way. It's part of the reason it ended up in so much debt. And, they thought that, a marina would, save the city. And Tubbs and the larger network of people around him really had the vision to say, like, we're a place that's actually hurting. We've got a lot of traumatized kids and
Mm.
families from a lot of deep exposure to violence. Our schools are in trouble, on and on. They said, we actually need a coalition run by somebody who understands some of that human experience. And Hector Lara, who is just a visionary social worker and truly a movement leader, really brought people together for some of the kind of organized conversation and civic network kind of repair that Stockton really needed. So that's kind of the leadership side. But then I can think of, a dozen people who were like moms who organized a block, or churches who took responsibility for communications with police to make it more smooth and kind of, just there's so many small acts of courage and compassion for each other that also start allowing people to work together and build the networks of, I don't know, just build social networks
Yeah.
across the city.
I think it was also, I mean, just those stories of communities turning around and in this way where starting small can be this very powerful part to kind of bring about that change. It made me feel like, oh, all you need is just a few of these things and they come together and then it can kind of like really start to make a difference. It gave me a lot of, I don't know, hope that some of these areas can turn around, but it's, yeah, getting all of those different groups to eventually kind of come together there. um, I think it's the second chapter of the book is Josephine, Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. Josephine is like, it feels like you're on the Oregon Trail in this in this story, like these cabins and logging and going up these mountainous areas. But also you kind of start off with these stories of these couples and families who are kind of like working through all of these very deep seated challenges. And so I think one thing I would be curious to hear from you there is like how that work felt very different, how you came across, this part of Josephine and Oregon. And second, and maybe more broadly than Josephine, is this conversation around what happens when local governments get underfunded and sort of like when you start to really lose that drain of resources and what communities can do to respond to that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, Josephine County in Southern Oregon does feel like a world away, and yet it was so relatable and loving and amazing to work there. And I have to say, people, in this conversation about the far right, it can be really easy to write off places like Josephine. Josephine is a place with a critical mass of Oath Keeper organizing, Liberty Watch, and its kind of political spectrum runs from that sort of super hard right to a kind of law and order, public safety, Republican or libertarian kind of self-defense kind of vision. And, and we have a lot of ideas, or the American kind of mainstream left has a lot of ideas about what that is. And Josephine was an incredibly moving place to work for just checking some of my own biases about the good people again who are in a
Yeah.
place like that and working for it. So yeah, Josephine lost a lot of timber jobs a long time ago, and I was brought in to all of the Oregon timber counties as part of just the larger fiscal collapse of all of southern and eastern Oregon as it kind of went into its second, or in some places third generation without logging jobs. And so, I was brought in there for the same reasons that I started working in all my places, because they were just fiscally in a tailspin. Um, but just there, and they had across 2014 on truly dismantled local government, and not because people wanted to, but because they were just forced into that by
Yeah.
the just collapse in their tax revenue, restructuring of federal appropriations to Oregon after the Spotted Owl controversy, on and on. So they were having so many problems, and so it was this really extreme experiment in what it looks like not to have government. And so in the context of abolition, in the conversation around defunding law enforcement, it was incredible to work in Josephine and really see what what you need kind of when that's not there, and what it takes to have a kind of emergency dispatch apparatus. So it's a story of a lot of DIY armed self-defense and policing. It's a story of people really fighting 9 times, I mean, 9 times at the ballot box to get their people to approve new
Right. Right.
taxes for the sheriff's department. And just the kind of fortitude it takes to lose 8 and keep running it the ninth. I mean, and they changed it every time. It wasn't the kind of, they weren't just grinding through the same script. They were just experimenting, try this, try that, move in this way, redefine it that way. It was just really, really impressive. Um, and there, just like in Stockton, people gathered, those people who still believed in government, those people who did not wish to dismantle collective life and just arm ourselves in our house, had to really sort of build their own social movement, their own kind of counterculture, and kind of call to the larger public to reinvest in public sector. So, in the context of, the New York City race and just so many other things, I'm reminded of the fact that in in Josephine, in order to get the public to vote on a measure to reinvest in their public library system, library volunteers made 14,000 phone calls. This is a tiny place,
Wow.
got like 80,000 people in the entire 14,000 phone calls. I mean, that's just democracy in action. And they did it, in people's living rooms over potlucks and homegrown food and all these things. Like, it's not just a miserable grind. It's people sort of finding each other and working together.
Is there something that you saw across all of these communities, like in this idea of, experimentation and figure out, what works to start turning some of these areas around? Parts where you see the ability to experiment in a way where you feel like this has a higher chance of success, where it's not just like any idea can work and we should just, kind of do this like very broad-based approach where you're like, these few things tend to be the right approaches, whether it's, collaborations between like public and private sector, or collaborations across various groups, just so that way, right? I feel like in so many of these areas that already have such limited resources, where people are already, stretched to their limit, that appetite to sometimes experiment can feel limited. And I understand the exhaustion that many people sometimes feel when you have, tried to pass a vote 6, 7, 8 times, where you're like, I just don't have it in me anymore to try that ninth time. So, like, what maybe did you see that could help people find that starting floor that might be a little bit, higher?
Yeah. I think there's this sort of equilibrium, I think, that places have to find between sort of adapting and listening to local circumstances, and then also learning from other places.
Yeah.
And they I think the art
You're,
of
you're speaking my
local.
language, Michelle. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Love-
this is really like the big data kind of information-based, knowledge-based world can save people so much time. It can give them new tools. It sort of, you know, I cannot tell you in reporting this book how often my interviews would turn around and face me, in which people would just ask me a million questions about the other places
Mm.
I was working because they want to be learning from other cities. They want to be learning from academia, from data, from social science. So they need that, and then they also need something that is just truly adapted to the people and the culture and the local politics and the local history, the scar tissue that comes from like, oh, that particular part of government has no credibility right now. It's run badly. It's always been run badly, but this
Right.
one does. Lots of different variation. So, I think that's really important. And also I just, I want to say at this point in the conversation, um, that, nothing in my book or anything I've learned would ever say that these places can just turn the curve alone. Like, oh my
Yes.
God, look, they figured it all out. Like
Yeah.
intergenerational poverty traps become like high flying income mobility. Like, no, they
If
outsiders
only though, but yes, that's
if only like the pixie dust of volunteers could save us from everything.
yeah.
It's not that way. What goes on is that there is some kind of recovery internally that helps them make more effective demands of outside support, including academics and others. And academics and others like me want to come toward that kind of source of heat and light and inspiration. So we want to be part of things. Philanthropy has new places for dollars to quote unquote land. Outsiders start kind of showing up. You start winning federal grant cycles. The
Mm.
it makes them more able to secure the outside assistance. And that's really important because the structures of poverty and the kind of headwinds on these places are so fierce, as you know so well. I mean, that's the nature of inequality, right? Those headwinds just they exponentially grow. They just
Absolutely.
drag people down and they will keep them down. And they can, those winds are by and large blowing from outside. So this is not a story of like, stopping all of that pressure. It's just a story of kind of learning to manage what you can manage and sort of, get your house in order so that there is the civic network that can kind of work effectively with outsiders. And that means that outsiders have a job to do. Like you don't have to work in Stockton to be useful in Stockton. You don't have to live there.
Very true.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's super important to all the places that I've worked.
Yeah, no, I think there is always this desire to like, yeah, find the magic pixie dust and sprinkle it on an area, but that right really does not exist. And knowing right the nuances of an area, who its other leaders can be that it can turn to, what has even an area right that has right, Josephine that has struggled with the history of the loss of logging might not be the same as another, very similar area that has also had that same challenge, because it has a very different political bent or cultural history or experiences. And so thinking about who those right examples are that they can learn from, how you can use data for that is obviously something that's near and dear to our heart at American Inequality on this. But thinking about what it can mean for building up those communities is essential. I thought you did such an incredible job in the book and in your work more broadly, talking about like stigma and decency and people as humans rather than just like these ideas of these struggling places of poverty, and the people come through so strongly in the book. And I think so often folks in this work have that spreadsheet based approach, right? Like they come in and they're like, how do I fix this problem, without realizing that there are very real people struggling on the ground in that area. How did you go about being such a empathetic listener, worker in this space? Because I think a lot of people like lack that skill, and not to like poo-poo on lawyers for that too. They could sometimes like see this as a legal problem, right? They're like, how can I, work through the words here to fix this? Like I think you have this very unique approach to this, which is very powerful.
I That's very kind of you, Jeremy. I mean, let me give a 2-second biography by just saying I grew up in San Diego in what I consider just a moral wasteland. I hope I
Say
didn't
more.
just offend anybody. Sorry, San Diego. I grew up there a long time ago. I've had no contact with San Diego for a long time. But there
It
was
sounds like intentionally so, though.
maybe it's
Yeah,
not untrue.
yeah.
Um, but what I mean is that I grew up like just soaked in this kind of empty materialism, and it was
Mm,
very much against the values of my parents. Um, and the kind of larger I don't know, just the larger moral values that I was learning in my family. So the fact that, like, the center of social life was the mall just felt kind of empty. There was a way in which consumption was the kind of central focal point of civic life. And so, I don't do this kind of work because I'm so, charitable or something. I do this kind of work because these people are just better people to be I mean,
You're like, I just want to hang out with them, and so yeah,
yeah, I mean, the reality is that the people I get to work with by reporting stuff like this are just extraordinary people. So, I mean, they're doing me a favor. I get to be around people. I mean, I used to joke that reporting this book was like going to church all the time, and that is honestly how it felt. So it's not about being empathetic, it's about just recognizing that they have something that my world lacked, and I just went toward that thing. Like, how do I learn from them? How do I refill these empty tanks that I'm experiencing through their values? Um and there's no yeah, so that's all I would say. The art of holding all of that respect in some kind of narrative balance with recognizing how serious the hardships are was very hard. As a writer, it's like I thought of that constantly as my job. Like, how do I never sugarcoat these places and pretend like, oh, the heroes ran in with their red capes and saved the day and they've got it, and also, never kind of pathologize the place and sort of engage in poverty voyeurism. And
yeah.
so, figuring out how to sort of hold a truer story to me means, showing up for the complexity. And again, recognizing that at any given moment, any given family, any given person, they really can't carry more than themselves. Like, that's the art of larger collectives sort of moving against hard problems, is that people can kind of come and go, right? Like, I have surplus capacity right now. Now my parent is sick. I'm withdrawing from a lot of this work. Somebody takes my place. Lawrence, which is, third place Lawrence, Massachusetts, deindustrializing from the textile industry and a lot of manufacturing, just such a magnificent social network with a Caribbean kind of flair, and just so much warmth and life and vitality, and in such contrast to the stigma that many people apply to Lawrence as this kind of drug distribution portal for New England. And so Lawrence is really a special place. And um so honestly, the to be able to work in a place like that was truly a joy, and they have spread the network so far that people can kind of come and go from the work, and that's important because poverty is drowns people in obligations and urgency and personal crises all the time. So you've got to have a big group, where people can kind of, yeah, I don't know, drop out, come back, whatever.
Yeah, I know, Lawrence, I think you and I had talked about how, like, Lowell as well, Massachusetts, that there's, like, sometimes this desire to try and compare these 2 areas, and that people within those regions, like, really don't like that, don't see themselves as too similar. And I think you also do a very good job of making sure that we, like, treat communities as, as special as, having their own unique challenges and successes and heroes and failures, while also still broadening up this message of like, what can we, learn from, a New England town, struggling, with the opioid epidemic and things like that. Because I think so often we have this like desire to conflate certain areas that, are really not so similar.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I mean, those two cities are 20 minutes apart, and but they have different immigrant and refugee histories, and that makes a big difference. As Jess Anders, this incredible leader in Lawrence, put it to me, some people come in sort of, especially in Lowell, given the refugee populations there, afraid that if they speak out in public, their brother will be arrested or executed. Some people come in with or without immigration status. People have their own histories, and the immigration origin stories that compose a really diverse immigrant city like those two cities actually matter to the kind of civic organizing that you can do, because it makes a big difference, like what people are most afraid of and what they believe is possible. So anyway, among a million other things, Lawrence really taught me that there can't be a kind of universalized playbook where you just say, like, here's how we, save the day. But instead, Lawrence, they would want me to say their recipe is that you kind of, again, you learn from the outside, you listen inside, and you build from the assets and the peculiarities of your own community. And, you never shame shaming Lawrence because it's not pulling its bootstraps up like Lowell ignores, you know, really important differences about the assets that Lowell had in terms of its intergenerational wealth and its the ties of those families to
Yeah.
DC. And that stuff dates back, 80 years, but it endures in the kind of social network possibilities in the modern city.
Um, I'm sure you're thinking quite a bit about Detroit now too, just as, tariffs are kind of having the exact opposite effect that, we hear from the current administration about trying to, bring back manufacturing and industrial work in the US. Detroit, obviously getting hit with a whole, range of issues, over several years now. Um, Talk a bit about like how you see Detroit and sort of how it has changed both since you kind of worked on it and sort of what's been, kind of going on now in this like current narrative as we've been thinking about trying to bring back a lot of these jobs into the US and probably struggling quite a bit to do so.
Yeah, no, I mean, the job story and the deindustrialization that really happened post 2000. I mean, I think our public debate continues to have this kind of um, preoccupation with the deindustrialization that happened in the 40s through 60s and 70s. Those were huge waves. They slammed Detroit. There's a lot to say about them. But, post 2000 and going into the Great Recession was this whole new wave of deindustrialization. And that's a really big part of Detroit's bankruptcy, period. I mean, and you just, in order to understand what happened in Detroit as it kind of hit bottom, as, we like to say in our public discourse, um, you have to understand what was happening like right underfoot as this massive wave of layoffs hit the cities, I say, because it was lots of Rust Belt cities. Um, so that's one thing. But also, it's really important. The story I tell in Detroit in the book is about the land markets and what it means for a place to lose that much population and have its land values crater like that in
Right.
a world. I mean, this is like a pure inequality story in a world of such concentrated capital looking for a place to park money. And so what goes on in Detroit is the kind of assembly of these giant blight bundles into these sale units that then get fragmented into absentee ownership all over the place or aggregated into these giant real estate portfolios from Detroit's four billionaires who, aggregated so much land right in the city. And that story of kind of you can tell that story from a lot of different angles, but you can tell it as, opportunism of people coming in at the bottom and then, sort of extracting better rents at the upside, or you can tell it as courage and, risk taking to reinvest in the city and sort of reboot it all at once. Lots of different ways to think about the billionaires there. But the bottom line is that across that period of land collapse, Detroit spiraled into a foreclosure crisis and a land loss crisis that was just gutting to families. And so to just like layer, this embattled city of like the people who still remain there and to just take all their housing from them all at once, like right at the
Yeah.
bottom. So that's the story that I tell is people like trying to work on that problem. And here data was everything because if you don't know who's buying all this land and you can't figure out who these mysterious LLCs are that are accumulating
Mm,
tons of property and running what Josh Akers and a couple of other scholars called the eviction machine, this business model to kind of buy things in foreclosure, put a tenant in it, dump it on an auction, get it back. That took incredible research diligence and a lot of high skilled uh, social scientists and and journalists, investigative reporters, others. So to dig your way out of a big, complex problem like that massive wave of land loss, they needed outsiders. And then they needed again, that same scrappy network of insiders who create all kinds of political pressure around slumlords who really start kind of pushing against the owner class and demanding things of them. Um, so Detroit too became just this incredible story of experimentation, adaptation, information gathering, endurance, and change. And they're definitely still at it, obviously. And the word gentrification would have once seemed impossible in Detroit, and now it's everything in the downtown and midtown. And so
yeah.
they have a new set of challenges.
Yeah, no, I mean, this chapter, I feel like you can so clearly see this like visual of a city of people like picking up these like parcels of land in many ways. And it's so hard for I think many, folks to believe that that can like happen in cities, right? They think about them as like kind of these very dense clusters, and to know that they're kind of these huge swaths that were up for grabs. A lot of that, similarly in that, eviction machine too happens in the Bronx as well. Also a deindustrialized area, an area that has like very much so, been seen a loss of investment. And so these areas where people are continually pushed out, whether you think it's opportunistic or they're trying to help the community, I think I tend to like believe that they're, sweeping up those, pockets of land and not really creating a lot of opportunity for people to come back, into those areas, can be really devastating for communities for, the long term where folks had lived on that land for, years, if not generations. And so the challenge of Detroit and what it meant for city government that was trying to help the community get back on its feet, is really challenging. And I think what's also so interesting and wrapped up in it is like this relationship between, right, housing, jobs, and incomes too, right? That you need all of these things to very much so come together, with this layer of local government underneath it, where when, yeah, people are losing their jobs, they're losing their ability to pay rent, and when they lose their home, someone else can swipe it out from underneath them, and they're either forced to move away, or they become homeless, or they put more stress on the city's social services, and that depopulation loss can often create that downward cycle that we've talked about several times too.
Yeah, no, I think that's all true. And Detroit was so symbolic in our imagination for land ownership. Like I think it really stood for that. Like,
Mm,
you've pushed against some of these kind of idealizations of the 50s and the little house and the boat and the whatever. And I totally get all of your critique of that. But, they only serve to reinforce that, Detroit was one of these cities that sort of embodied the kind of idea of a single manufacturing salary, sort of holding up
Right,
a
right,
pretty good life for a family. And part of that was ownership. And now that I'm working in the deep South, because a lot of my work now is in Mississippi, that I the sense of Detroit in the Great Migration as a place to come out from under the debt world of the Jim Crow South and to own land for the Black South to sort of come into Detroit and become landowners is an even deeper meaning of this kind of this cultural prize in America of land ownership and the independence, the autonomy, the safety that represents, and the achievement. And it's that much deeper in Detroit because of this history of the great migration, I think. So when that ownership is lost and when it becomes a tenant city, it's a bigger thing than just which is more cost effective, renting or owning? Like, it's not
right.
just about the kind of private math of which is more expensive. It is this sort of deeper independence. And I think, that's something I heard over and over in all my places. I continue to hear them in others that I'm working in. People want to be independent. They don't want to, quote unquote, have their hand out to the state. And, land ownership is part of that. Cities getting back on their feet is part of that. Some of it is a kind of form of self-loathing that I think is unwarranted. Like sometimes people are in the position that they're in because the structures around them have just like driven them there. Um, but in any event, people don't want to have their hands out, and I think it's incredibly important to build systems that allow people to kind of do for themselves and do for each other. And that's where, more conservative kind of ideas about autonomy and independence, I think really resonate in very low income places, even when they're super blue in their voting politics. So I really saw that in Detroit. And yeah.
I want to wrap us up with a question that I ask all of our fantastic guests, which is around the path forward. And so here, I'm trying to think about, right, solutions for addressing some of these, inequalities, for addressing citywide poverty. We've talked about a few already, right? How to, start small, bring these coalitions together, start to build some of that momentum. Thinking about how you can start from these places that might raise the floor underneath you. I think your final chapter is called Facing Forward as well, so you kind of have a little bit of path forward. Like we're all looking in the same direction here. So what have you seen, whether it's public or private or nonprofits, kind of sector folks coming together, whether it's within these regions or even zooming out more broadly, that's been powerful.
I mean, at the risk of being cheesy, can I be cheesy? This
She's
is
away.
actually I have a prop. I have another prop.
Oh,
Um,
good.
this was given to me in it wasn't I didn't receive it as cheesy in person at all. This was given to me by a small business owner in Josephine County. He runs a garage. Um, and he had 400 of these printed. And then I think a whole set of 1,000 eventually. And he just gives them out all over Josephine County. And he gave me a whole stack. I give them out now. I give them out
Nice.
in other cities. Um, but this is what he wanted people to know is like, don't give up on this place. Figure out something to do it. You matter either because you're kind of part of the problem because you've checked out or you just like you're hoarding yours or whatever. Or you matter because you're kind of working with other people to actually participate. And I really believe that. And I think there's a way, especially again, sort of wrapping where we started, that sitting here in 2025, it can feel really overwhelming. It feels like there's so much work to do. And as one of my amazing students' moms said to her, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Words to live by.
Very much so.
Yeah, and so, but I would also add, and the "You Matter" card reminds me that you shouldn't do nothing. That's also, like, part of
Which
part of
most people, right.
Right, you shouldn't do nothing. Like, things are when things are bad out there, people need to kind of get busy and look out for each other and look out for people beyond their immediate families. And the beautiful thing about working in places like this is that, that's just everyday business. People depend on each other all the time, and so, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I feel like in this time where it can feel quite dark or where, hopelessness prevails, like this idea, to that you ought to do something like don't do nothing is really important. And I like that idea as well too that, that you and this, person Josephine Oregon are like handing out so many of these cards of you matter to folks, and it creates this broader like we right you when you have enough of these folks have those cards, they build those coalitions to start bringing around change, because a lot of individuals who think that they matter and know that they matter, they can kind of come together to be much more powerful than any one individual. So I
Yeah,
think
and
there's a lot of
actually, I mean, can
great
I
work.
just smuggle in one last word on that, which is
You
that
can smuggle
that
as many
is
as you want.
well, this is obvious to your audience, but it's so worth saying that that is how political accountability happens, right? Like, that's what goes on in all these cities. They build a civic network, they start deploying that to move elections, to mount candidates, to kind of make things different. So, it is how our society works. Democracy is a participatory support or sport and whatnot. It is, you have to participate and build these networks because that is how you actually make government that is accountable to its people and that's working for its people and not working for its donors, not working for its campaign investor, and so forth. So, um, really, really important that in our larger environment, people have to be kind of taking back their governments. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done sort of from the ground up on modeling that.
It's a powerful note to end on. So, Michelle, thanks so much for joining us today. I know you've got some exciting Thanksgiving plans coming up. I will be sure that if my in-laws do eat a turducken, that I share you some photos of it, because I know it's a bizarre phenomenon that not too many folks know about, and it probably ought to be that way. So,
I am not
looking
eating a
forward to staying in touch.
turducken. I'm not eating a
Yeah,
turducken, but I admire you for it, Jeremy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who
of
made
course.
time for this.
Yeah. Bye, Michelle.
Bye.